Hi everyone, I'm Ryan from 2 Car Pros, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to replace the front struts or shock absorber spring assembly, or sometimes they're called coilovers, on a 2005 Ford F-150. The specifics are it's 4-wheel drive and has a 5.4 liter V8, but I don't think the engine size matters in this configuration, but the 4-wheel drive does matter. This gets a little tricky due to the CV axle into the hub assembly gets in your way quite a bit. If you have a 2-wheel drive F-150, as I mentioned later, it's probably a lot easier, but if you have a 4-wheel drive F-150, it's a little tricky. So just follow along and you'll get it. I looked up a couple procedures on how to do this repair, and all of them wanted you to take the far side of the lower control arm off. I found a little bit of a workaway. If you take the inside, the part that connects to the frame, off on the lower control arm, those 2 bolts, and lower that down, it's a lot easier than trying to take the spindle and hub assembly and take the CV axle out. That's a pain in the neck. So there is a little bit of a trick to it. There are 2 really essential tools you're going to need to do this repair, as well as a socket set. I called them out during the video coming up. You're going to need one of these, a really nice good sized punch. This was instrumental in getting everything apart and back together. And probably most important of all is a very large pry bar. Mine is snap-on. I bought a really nice one. I think this is a 3-foot pry bar, I think. Maybe 2.5 feet, and it was absolutely essential for getting everything to where it needed to go. And this is your best friend. You are going to need this if you're going to do this repair along with me. This is something that's approachable in a garage type situation. I feel anybody with any kind of experience will be able to do. Just go slow and take your time. This is something you don't want to get frustrated with. This is something that you want to be methodical about and really think about what you're doing before you do it. And of course, after any kind of suspension repair or replacement like we're doing today, you're going to want to get the truck realigned. Anytime you change the suspension in any way, take it apart, put it back together, get it realigned, go to your alignment shop, pay the money, get it realigned. You'll thank me later. On the specific truck I'm working on today, there was an aftermarket strut, or there was like a little lift kit, a little leveling kit on it. So when I take off the shock absorber mounts, first I say they are 17mm bolts, and I believe on stock struts they are 15 millimeters. I explain that a little bit later on, but just so you're not caught off guard, that's how that is. With that out of the way, we're gonna grab our pry bar. We're gonna get to work. All right, the first thing we're gonna do on these lower control arm mounts is we're going to mark with Sharpie where they were roughly. And of course, after you do any kind of suspension work like this, you're gonna wanna get a realignment. But this will get you close enough so you can take it to your local alignment shop. Next thing we're going to do is hit up this steering knuckle here with some WD-40 and let it sit for a little while. All right, with the WD-40 seeping into there, we're going to take a 21mm socket and remove that nut. And this is where it's really nice to have air tools. Perfect. So the next thing we need to do is take this tie rod here out of this fitting. And I will say that I like Ford's tapered fits here because it requires just a very small amount of pressure and it comes right out, which is just wonderful if you've ever worked on stuff like this before and you have to put a bunch of pressure on it and smack it. This is not the case, honestly. It is really easy. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna squirt WD-40 on both sides of this bolt surface here. So we're gonna wanna do it here, and then where the nut meets that same surface on the back side. So you want to spray back here on this surface where the nut meets this mount. All right, for the big bolt that is holding the strut to the lower control arm, you are going to need a 27mm socket on this side. On the far side you can't see, and then a 30mm for the nut side. We're going to go ahead and remove that. Alright, so the nut is basically all the way off there. You can see I took it off, but I'm going to put it back on. And then I'm going to grab my brass hammer, or you could use a dead blow hammer, or even a rubber mallet probably. And we're going to hammer that through. Okay, and then we're going to remove that nut. Okay, once we've gotten to this stage, we're going to take our punch here and hammer the other side of the bolt where we just removed the nut so it'll come out easier. Once we've gotten to this stage, we're going to want to grab a large pry bar here and pry it up a little bit. Just kind of wiggle it around. There we go. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is spray some WD-40 in these lower control arm nuts on both sides, where the nut meets the mount and where the bolt meets the mount. The bolt head meets the mount. And we're going to do that for both. But I'm going to show you how to remove this one first. So we're going to get to this stage here, and it's a 27 millimeter on this side. I don't have a wrench, so I'm just using a breaker. It's like a mini breaker bar to hold the nut side. And then I have a 21 millimeter socket for the bolt side. I'll hold this, hold steady, let it rip. Just like that. This is where it really pays to have air tools. You could do it with manual tools, but I have air tools, so I might as well use them. And then we can remove that bolt. And if it didn't slide out easy, which it might not, you can use a chisel and punch it through, and you can also use a large pry bar and kind of pry this around in such a way that it'll become loose. All right, again, we're gonna hit this with some WD-40, our friend there. Make things nice and easy for us. Like that. We're gonna let that sit for a little while. All right, so we've come to this side, and you might be wondering, because there is a bit of a interference with the stud that holds the sway bar in place. So we're gonna use a wrench here on this nut, and then I have a wiggly, a 3/8 wiggly on my socket on my gun I was using earlier, so. Just like that, very good. Okay. All right, so this bolt was a bit of a handful to get out. It's not even all the way out. You can see it's hanging here, but just barely. What I did is I pushed the entire lower control arm over and used a pry bar and kind of massaged it out of my way, because it was a bit of an interference fit with the CV axle flange right here. So you kind of have to move this over in such a way that it will clear and you can get the bolt out. It is quite the pain in the neck. So once it got to this stage and the on bolt washer was exposed, I used a punch, this one, and hammered it so it would come out. And I might finish that right now, and I don't care if the bolt drops. Is that nice? That works? And there you go. All done. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is take off the 3 nuts that are on top of the strut tower here, and they're 17 millimeters. And there's one kind of hard to see back here. You can kind of see the stud of it. You can kind of see the stud of it there. I'm going to take that one out first because it is the most difficult to get to. And you're going to need a deep well socket because the studs stick out a little far. So we got that nut nice and loose, so we can remove that. And then we just do the same thing for this nut here and this nut here. Okay, so we've gotten those 3 nuts off. Here's the last one. Just like that. And now the only thing holding the strut in is logistics and negotiating that lower mount. So we've come to this point where the back of the lower control arm is loose-ish. And all we need to do, and if you have a 2-wheel drive F-150, you might not have to do this because the CV axle is not in the way. So if you have a 2-wheel drive F-150, you might get away with not having to do all this hullabaloo, and you could just remove the tie rod here, get that out of the way, and you're home free. But if you have a 4-wheel drive F-150 like me, you're gonna have to do it this way. There's no choice. So this is where it helps to have a helper, and if you would, put the, so you're just gonna put the pry bar in there, and just pry down. It'll probably be big league. Yeah.
Bust your camera up.
I would like it if you didn't do that.
Yeah, I would like that too.
We're really close. So in case you missed what I did right there, I stuck that pry bar underneath there. Now be careful because the strut can fall out at this point, and obviously if that lands on you, it's going to hurt because they weigh about 50 pounds. Can you lift the upper control arm? I put it right there and just... Yeah. Oh, close. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Just like that. So having a big pry bar is absolutely essential in this repair. And what I was doing was lifting it up a little bit so the shock or the strut could squeeze past there, because you only need a teeny bit of clearance. So that's what that looks like. And now we have the strut out. All right, so we have here our two struts we took out of the truck, the passenger and driver. I'm doing the driver currently, as evidenced by the beginning of this video. And I wanted to point out that these, I'm unsure if this is a stock strut or not. The truck was equipped with a leveling kit. Was not my decision. I bought the truck secondhand, and it also has this puck on top in order to give it a little bit more lift. Some people like that. I'm not really one of them. So the shock on the right is the correct shock for my truck, and it does seem to vary which shock it goes where, because they asked me if it was four-wheel drive and if it's an FX4 and a bunch of other questions. So you're gonna wanna make sure you get the right strut for your truck because it might differ a little bit. So just double check that. And I always recommend a Ford Motorcraft OEM part. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is take a look at the top of our new strut here and remove these nuts. You wanna use the new nuts that came with your strut. Okay, and you can see that the top has that 3 stud configuration, but the bushing only goes in 1 or 2 ways, but the configuration is a little off center. So you have to figure out which stud goes toward the engine, and it looks like this upside down. So this stud is going towards the engine while the bushing is flat towards me. And we're gonna slide that in, and then we're going to put one of those nuts in so it doesn't fall down on us, but we're not gonna tighten it. Okay, as you can see, we've gotten all 3 nuts on, but they're not tight. We're gonna leave them loose, so that way we have a little bit of play when we're trying to get the lower bushing mount in. Okay, so now I'm going to work on putting the lower end of the strut here back into its home, and we're gonna basically do the reverse of pulling it out. So it's gonna be lots of elbows and darkness, and we're gonna use our best friend pry bar here to get it in place. I'm gonna do my best to show you exactly how it's done, but please forgive me if I'm not able to do that. It doesn't. Okay, once we get to this point, we can replace our bolt, replace the bolt that goes through the clevis and the bushing. And if you're having a little bit of trouble with it, you can use a hammer, a brass hammer, and hammer that through. As you saw, when you have a buddy putting tension on, it's really easy to get the bolt in. And then we're just gonna set the nut on for now, and we'll tighten it later. Just like that, and now we can worry about getting the lower control arm bolts in. So we're back to the hard part on the lower control arm there. And then you're gonna wanna get your helper to put some tension on it, on the top here, so it'll lower down to where you can get the bolt in. Yes. There we go. And we're gonna do our best to line it up where we marked it earlier with our Sharpie. I know it's a little hard to see due to the WD-40. Not Ford's most brilliant design, but with a chisel and some friends, you can get it on. You can get it through there. And as you can see, we made a little bit of a boo-boo by putting in the bolt a little too far, but that's okay, because our buddy with a pry bar is gonna pry it back a little bit, because if you try to get the nut in, it won't fit on because of that stud from the sway bar. So we're gonna back that up a little bit. There you go. And then we're gonna get the nut on. And then we can hammer it from the other side like we did before.
Probably just tighten it.
You could. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get a pry bar in here like this, pry it down a little bit, and pulling it out so we can get it into that position. This is when it's nice to bribe your friends. So we're doing our best to line it up here. And then we're gonna tighten her down. The other side is already lined up and it's probably not going anywhere. So we're gonna do our best to do that, and we're gonna go ahead and tighten them up. All right, now we're going to torque to spec these bolts. Torque to spec. All right, and then we're gonna torque this one too. Just gonna torque it. All done. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is torque this bolt that holds the lower strut into that clevis there. And here we go. Torqued perfectly. So now we're going to tighten the nuts on the top of the shock tower. And I'm gonna use a ratcheting wrench this time. Make it a little easier on me. So those are aftermarket studs, so they had aftermarket bolts. I put the stock ones back on and they are 15 millimeters. Oops. And you don't want to do them all on one side all at once. You kind of want to go around in a circle and do your best to tighten them evenly. Okay, as you can see, those nuts are nice and back on, torqued to spec, and you know, if you don't have a torque wrench, they're on fairly tight, so that's something you really don't want to come unbolted there. So that's what that looks like, and we can move on. I'm just joking. Of course, we're going to get our torque wrench out and actually torque them. Could you imagine what the internet would do to me if I didn't? Oh, I shudder to think. So this tie rod to wheel knuckle stud here, this nut goes to a 111 foot-pounds, so we gotta load up our torque wrench. And if you, okay, before I get started torquing things, if you don't have a torque wrench, that's okay. You just need to do it really stinking tight, because 111 foot-pounds is pretty strong. And that's why it helps to have somebody hold the wheel on the other side while you're torquing this particular one, because it does have a tendency to move. Now we can move on and torque the other studs. Okay, so this bolt here that holds the shock absorber to the lower control arm through this clevis needs to be 351 foot-pounds of torque, which is a monstrous amount. If you have a breaker bar, now is the time. And yeah, that seemed really high to me, so I double-checked it on All Data. That's where I'm getting these figures from. So if they seem a little ridiculous, go complain at them. But that's what the All Data manual says, so that's what we're going to put it to. There we go. The next step, we need to tighten the lower control arm bolts to the frame. There's two of them, one at the front, one at the back. We've been working on those all day. So I'm going to show you how to do one because they're identical, but you do need to torque both of them to 222 foot-pounds. And you can just do it from the nut side. The bolt's really not going to turn at this point. You can keep an eye on it. If you're really scared about it, have a buddy put a wrench on it or something. But I'm just doing it nut side. It's totally fine because it's really tight. Oh, there we go. Do that for both of these now. And finally, last thing we're going to torque today are the 3 nuts on top of the strut tower here, and they are 35 foot-pounds, and you're going to need a deep well socket. Just like that. Except do it for all 3, including the one you can't really see that my pointer finger's on right now. So we are all done with our repair. It's pretty straightforward if you follow the video along with me. There is that little bit of a trick to it, and all the information I got as far as torque specs, I got via All Data. If you don't have a torque wrench, that's absolutely fine. Just really, really tight. These are big suspension components. You don't want them to come undone. And make sure you're using some sort of breaker bar or a leverage implement. After you're finished with this repair, make sure you get the truck aligned. Like I've said earlier, I think this is like my 3rd or 4th time saying it, but it is important. That's why I'm repeating it. I'm sorry if I have to be a little bit repetitive. That pretty much wraps it up for this repair. If you enjoyed this type of content, please leave a like and consider subscribing. I do these videos every Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.